Gaze closely at this image. It's more than just a piece of paper. It's a symbol of immense power, a tangible representation of global commerce. From the intricate engravings on a crisp dollar bill to the dizzying array of numbers flashing across currency exchange screens in financial districts worldwide, the US dollar has long stood as the undisputed monarch of the global economy. For decades, its reign has seemed absolute, its stability unquestioned, its influence reaching into every corner of trade, investment, and national policy. We've grown accustomed to its dominance, so much so that its presence often fades into the background noise of our daily lives, a constant we rarely truly examine. But what if I told you that while the world was busy tracking stock market highs and lows, debating interest rate hikes and analyzing inflation reports, a profound structural transformation in the dollar's role has been quietly unfolding? A shift so fundamental yet so subtle that most people, even those deeply entrenched in financial circles, have largely overlooked its magnitude. It's like watching a majestic river, seemingly unchanging, yet beneath its calm surface, the very bedrock of its course is slowly, inexorably shifting. This isn't about a sudden collapse or a dramatic dethroning. It's about a gradual, almost imperceptible evolution that has redefined the dollar's place in the modern world. To truly grasp this unseen shift, we must first appreciate the dollar's historical foundation. For over half a century, specifically since the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in the early 1970s, the US dollar ascended to unparalleled supremacy. It became the world's primary reserve currency, the medium for most international trade, and the benchmark against which almost all other currencies were measured. This wasn't by accident. It was built on a foundation of perceived economic strength, political stability, and the sheer depth and liquidity of US financial markets. The dollar became synonymous with safety, a sanctuary in times of global economic turbulence. Its perceived invincibility instilled a deep-seated confidence that became a self-fulfilling prophecy, drawing more and more of the world's wealth into its orbit. This was the before picture, a world where the dollar reigned supreme, seemingly unchallengeable, its status etched in stone. Now you might be thinking, what does this have to do with me? I'm not a currency trader. But this isn't just a story for economists or bankers. The dollar's evolving role impacts everything from the price of your morning coffee to the stability of your job, from the cost of imported goods to the geopolitical landscape that shapes global peace and conflict. When the foundational currency of the world recalibrates, the ripple effects touch every aspect of our interconnected lives. It influences inflation rates, affects investment opportunities, and even dictates the balance of power between nations. Understanding this quiet transformation is key to deciphering the economic forces shaping our present and future. So here's the central question that begs to be answered. If the dollar has indeed changed, what exactly was the nature of this transformation? What fundamental aspects of its power and function have been altered? And perhaps more importantly, why did such a monumental shift occur right under our noses, largely unnoticed by the very public, whose lives it so profoundly influences? The answers lie not in dramatic headlines, but in a series of interconnected events and policy decisions that, over time, have subtly yet powerfully re-engineered the very essence of the dollar's global standing. It's time to pull back the curtain and explore the unseen forces that have reshaped the world's most powerful currency. The seeds of this profound change were sown in the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. Faced with an economic meltdown of unprecedented scale, central banks, particularly the US Federal Reserve, unleashed a barrage of unconventional monetary policies. Quantitative easing, or QE, became the buzzword of the era. This wasn't merely about adjusting interest rates. It involved the direct injection of trillions of dollars into the financial system through massive asset purchases. The intent was to stabilize markets and stimulate growth, but the long-term implications for the dollar were subtle yet significant. The expansion of the money supply, while necessary at the time, began to chip away at the traditional perception of the dollar's scarcity and value. It introduced a new dynamic where the very foundation of the currency could be massively expanded by policy decisions, fostering an environment of engineered liquidity rather than organic market forces. This was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, steady tide, subtly altering the currency's underlying structure. Simultaneously, the digital revolution began to challenge the traditional financial order. The emergence of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, while initially dismissed as fringe phenomena, introduced the concept of decentralized, permissionless digital value. More pragmatically, nations across the globe started exploring and developing their own central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. China, for instance, has been a frontrunner in piloting its digital yuan, creating a parallel digital payment infrastructure that operates outside the traditional dollar-based SWIFT system. These digital innovations, alongside the development of new cross-border payment systems and fintech solutions, began to offer alternatives to the dollar's traditional role as the indispensable intermediary for international transactions. While none of these individually posed an existential threat, collectively they represented a technological and systemic diversification, chipping away at the dollar's uncontested dominance in the digital realm. Compounding these shifts were significant geopolitical realignments and concerted efforts by various nations to reduce their reliance on the dollar. Major economic blocs, wary of being overly dependent on a single currency, began advocating for a more multipolar reserve system. Countries like Russia and China have actively pursued de-dollarization strategies, signing currency swap agreements, increasing trade denominated in local currencies, and diversifying their foreign reserves away from the dollar. These moves, often driven by strategic geopolitical considerations, are not aimed at overthrowing the dollar, but rather at building resilience and reducing vulnerability to external economic pressures. We see this in the growing number of bilateral trade deals settled in currencies other than the dollar, a quiet but persistent trend. Perhaps one of the most potent yet ironically self-defeating catalysts for de-dollarization has been the weaponization of finance through sanctions. The United States has increasingly used its control over the dollar-dominated global financial system to impose sanctions on various entities and nations. While effective as a foreign policy tool, this strategy has inadvertently spurred sanctioned countries, and even those fearing future sanctions, to actively seek alternatives. When access to the dollar system can be revoked as a political measure, it creates a powerful incentive for nations to develop parallel financial rails, reducing their exposure to this potential vulnerability. This has accelerated the diversification away from the dollar in specific strategically important contexts. Finally, the blurring lines between monetary policy and market intervention have also contributed to this subtle shift. Central banks, particularly in times of crisis, have become increasingly active participants in financial markets, not just as regulators, but as massive buyers and sellers of assets. This constant intervention, while aimed at maintaining stability, has altered the perception of the dollar's natural value and stability. It introduces a new layer of complexity, where market forces are often influenced, if not outright dictated, by policy decisions. This raises questions about the true price discovery mechanism and the perceived risk associated with a currency whose value is heavily managed rather than purely market-driven. These undercurrents, subtle yet powerful, have collectively reshaped the dollar's global standing, paving the way for a new monetary landscape. The confluence of these factors paints a picture not of the dollar's demise, but of its evolution into a different kind of hegemon. The new dollar, while undeniably still the most powerful currency on the planet, operates within a global financial architecture that is far more complex and multipolar than it was even a decade ago. Its influence remains immense, but it is no longer the singular, unquestioned cornerstone it once was. Instead, it is a dominant force in a system where other major currencies, regional blocs, and even digital assets are increasingly carving out their own spheres of influence. The era of the dollar as the only game in town is quietly receding, replaced by a more nuanced reality where its power is shared, challenged, and circumvented in ways previously unimaginable. This isn't about an absolute fall, but rather a significant shift in relative power. The dollar isn't collapsing. It's experiencing a relative decline in its share of global reserves and transactions as other currencies gain ground. Consider the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves, which, while still dominant, has seen a gradual, albeit slow erosion over the past 2 decades. From a peak near 72% in 2001, it now hovers closer to 58–59%. This isn't a cliff dive, but a steady, persistent redistribution of economic influence. Other currencies like the euro, the yen, and increasingly the Chinese yuan are gradually increasing their presence in central bank portfolios and international trade. This slow rebalancing doesn't mean the dollar is weak, but rather that the global economy is becoming less dollar-centric, fostering a more diversified and, arguably, more resilient monetary ecosystem. This evolving landscape has profound implications for global trade and investment. Businesses engaged in international commerce are increasingly finding opportunities and necessities to transact in non-dollar currencies, reducing conversion costs and foreign exchange risks. New trade routes, particularly those involving emerging economies, are often bypassing the dollar entirely, utilizing bilateral currency arrangements. For investors, this means a more diverse set of opportunities and risks. The traditional safe haven appeal of the dollar remains, but strategic diversification into other major currencies or even commodity-backed assets is becoming a more common and prudent practice. Governments, too, are adjusting their foreign policy and economic strategies, recognizing that financial leverage is no longer solely concentrated in Washington. This manifests in everything from commodity pricing to international lending practices, where alternatives to dollar-denominated finance are emerging. Crucially, technology and data are not just facilitators of this change, they are active shapers of the new monetary era. Blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, and big data analytics are revolutionizing how transactions are processed, how value is transferred, and how monetary policy is conceived. Central bank digital currencies are gaining traction globally, promising faster, cheaper, and more traceable transactions, potentially bypassing traditional banking infrastructure and the dollar's intermediary role. The rise of sophisticated data analysis allows for real-time tracking of global capital flows and economic sentiment, providing central banks and governments with unprecedented tools to influence markets. This technological frontier presents both challenges and opportunities for the dollar. While potentially enhancing its efficiency, it also opens the door for competing digital currencies to gain significant traction, further diversifying the monetary landscape. Ultimately, understanding this silent revolution requires moving beyond the simplistic narratives of currency wars or impending collapse. The story of the dollar is one of continuous adaptation and evolution within a dynamic global system. The true power lies not in predicting its downfall, but in comprehending the nuanced ongoing evolution of its role. The dollar has changed not through a dramatic visible event, but through a gradual, persistent accumulation of policy shifts, technological advancements, and geopolitical realignments. To truly grasp the forces shaping our economic future, we must look beyond the daily headlines and delve into these subtle yet profound shifts that redefine the very nature of global power and prosperity. The unseen shifts often hold the most significant truths,